Good idea. All right, well,
Very easy.
it's a little after 10. I see that we have about 49 attendees or so, and so I think I'll get started. So welcome. My name's Kat Moore. Welcome to the 2024 Grant Round Kickoff Application Workshop. There's a couple instructions on the screen about renaming yourselves so that if you have a question, we know who we're speaking with. The chat's muted. You guys are muted on there. But you can use the Q&A function, question and answer function to ask some questions. We're going to take pauses in between presenters to address those questions if there are any. And we'll also take a pause if you want to ask questions at that point. You could throw them into the Q&A. It looks like we say to use the chat function, but I think that's disabled. At least that's what Amy is saying in the Q&A. So sorry about that. And we are recording it, and so it will be available on our website. And I'm going to take a minute to show you around our website to show you where we will keep that in just a minute. So as I mentioned, I'm Kat Moore. I'm one of the new assistant section managers, and I'm here today with Kendall Kohler, Bob Warner, and Josh Lambert presenting, but this is the rest of our team at a recent staff gathering. And here are the areas that we're currently assigned to. We are doing a little bit of staff shuffling because of our reorganization and my hiring into the assistant section manager. But this is who your grant managers are assigned to currently. You can also find this information on our website. So everything that we're going to be talking about today, we're just really going to be talking about the changes that we have to the 2024 grant round. And so we encourage you to take a look at the 2023 application workshop that we did last year, which was pretty thorough about all of the eligible sponsors, project types, all the information that you need to know, detailed information that you need to know is on that application workshop. And we also, of course, have our manual, which is pretty thorough, has all the forms that you need and information. Our website also has a lot of information, and of course your lead entity coordinators, our wealth of knowledge, and your grant managers. So I'm gonna stop the PowerPoint for just a second and go live for you guys. So here's our homepage, rco.wa.gov. And where I encourage you to go for any grant program that you're interested in, but we know the most about the salmon program websites, is hover over grants. This window will pop up and you click on salmon PSAR. That will open up our grant launch page. Scroll down a little bit. Over here on the right is everything that you need for applications. This is Manual 18. So you can download that there. These are all the forms that are embedded inside of Manual 18, but here they are separately. You'll need a lot of these. Some of them are checklists, some of them are required forms. You have all that information here. Over on the left is the kind of RCO timeline for the grant round. But of course, you'll need to contact your lead entity coordinator in order to get your specific timeline for your watershed. Scrolling down further, announcements, we created a little at a glance fact sheet about the different grant programs that we have running in the salmon section in 2024, since this year's a little different. We have a fact sheet about the new Riparian grant program. And here are some RFPs for the targeted investment program and the PSAR large capital program. And then scrolling all the way down to the bottom is where we have, excuse me, the application workshop from last year that I mentioned. And it's on YouTube, so you click on that. And I think when I sent out the invite to this workshop, I gave you guys a little tutorial on how to you can jump around that video because it's quite a long workshop. It was, I think, 2 hours. So there's different chapters that you can pop into, so you don't have to watch the entire thing. If you're just interested in planning grant information or acquisition grant information, you can click chapters to that. And then down below is also another spot to get to Manual 18 if you want to just specifically check out particular or download particular appendices instead of the entire document. So that's our website. There's one more thing I wanted to show you on here, and it's because it's a little buried, but this is the way to find out who your lead entity coordinator is. And if you don't already know, so I hover over what we do and click on salmon and orca recovery. And then managing organizations is where there's information about the regions and lead entities and the Washington Salmon Coalition, which is the umbrella group for the lead entities. Click on lead entities, and there's a map that is a GIS-based map, and the colors load. And so these are each of the lead entities, similar to the map that I showed a second ago, but this is an interactive one that you can click on it, and it lets you know who your lead entity coordinator is, how to contact them, and if you scroll down, who your grant manager is. I think some of the other areas might show who the regional, which region you're in, and it doesn't have a regional coordinator, but it has your lead entity coordinator and your grant manager. So we try to keep that information up to date. But as I mentioned, we're changing areas around a little bit, so there may be a lag in that. So that's just a quick orientation to our website. There's also contact us, a general staff directory, or just a grants manager directory that you can use to find out who you should contact at RCO. All right, popping back in here. All right, so that's where to find more information. So this year, as I mentioned, we have a bunch of concurrent grant programs running at the same time. We've got our PSAR and surfboard grant round, which is kind of our regular projects, although we solicit PSAR projects only every other year. Along with PSAR regular projects, there's PSAR large capital projects, which is a grant program for large projects that the Puget Sound Partnership runs. We have a brand new funding source, Riparian grant funding, which we're going to talk about next. We have a targeted investment program, which is something we've done 2 previous grant rounds, but this year it's a little bit different. And then we also have a little bit of a change in the monitoring, regional monitoring program, which we're not going to go into here, but we have a new monitoring GSRO science coordinator, and her name is Greer Mayer. And some of you may know her from her work at Upper Columbia and in her consulting work, but we're excited to have her, and she's your main contact for regional monitoring. And so if anyone needs her information, just take a look at the website or reach out to your grant manager and we'll get you connected with her. So with that, I'm going to pass it on to Josh, I believe.
Thanks, Kat.
Yeah.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Josh Lambert. I am, as Kat mentioned, a grant manager at RCO. I'm going to discuss the Riparian Restoration Program, which is funded through the Natural Climate Solutions Account as part of the Climate Commitment Act passed by the Washington Legislature in 2023. So I will provide you an overview of the program's objectives, the available funding that starts in 2024. We'll discuss match requirements, eligible project elements, how to scope your project. We'll touch on the new riparian enhancement plans that everybody's excited about. We'll discuss grant application timeline and requirements. And just to point you to Manual 18, Appendix M is the program guidelines and policies for the Riparian Grant Program. So the objectives of this program is to fund projects that improve riparian areas above the ordinary high water mark within the floodplain, along lake shores, estuaries, and marine near shore. Work that enhances conditions necessary to sustain salmonids throughout their life cycle. This image shows a depiction of a riparian management zone. To delineate riparian areas for your project, please refer to the guidance developed by Department of Fish and Wildlife, which is referenced in Appendix K in Manual 18. We will also be providing links to this guidance in a one-page resource document along with other linked resources that may help you develop your application and project. And those will be on the website that Kat showed earlier, the salmon, specifically the salmon page. So this table outlines the riparian program funding available to each salmon recovery region starting in the 2024 salmon grant round. Multiple lead entities within each region will receive a subset of this funding with the amount not to be less than $300,000 per lead entity. If a lead entity is unable to fully obligate its riparian funding after the 2024 grant round, it will be able to either carry the money into the 2025 grant round or transfer its allocation to another lead entity. RCO will track this riparian funding separately from Surfboard and PZAR, and it has a distinct grant application that very closely mirrors the salmon application in PRISM. To begin your application, you can select riparian program funding on the program and project type page. So the eligible project types include acquisition, restoration, stewardship, and assessment. These can be proposed as an individual or in some cases combined into one project. Please note site-specific planning design for in-stream elements or the riparian establishment plan is only allowed as part of the restoration project, and is capped at the 30% allowable A&E. So let's step through some of these project types. Acquisition projects with 50% uplands or less are eligible for riparian grant funding. The area proposed for acquisition can be a subset of a larger acquisition project, but the riparian habitat conservation area can't exceed 50% uplands. If segregating riparian habitat from a larger parcel, you'll need to provide the deed of right map and legal description, if available, to the appraiser, so that the appraisal report provides a fair market value for the conservation area funded by the riparian grant only. Talk with your grant manager before scoping the appraisal to be sure you can segregate values from the larger parcel to document the fair market value of the riparian grant conservation area. If you do have more than 50% uplands, that's okay. Your project is still eligible for Surfboard or PZAR funds following the matching share requirements outlined in Manual 3 and 18. Riparian habitat projects include the following eligible activities. I should say riparian restoration projects. It's worth noting that a riparian project does not necessarily have to involve planting, as long as the primary goal and objective is to restore or enhance function of riparian habitat that directly benefits salmon. If proposing invasive species control as the sole work of the project, your application must demonstrate riparian habitat is the primary objective and salmon recovery is the primary goal of the project. Installing fencing and water gaps to control livestock or limit herbivory and reduce impacts from vehicles and foot traffic are eligible project elements. Unique to the riparian program is funding for temporary on-site nursery development or off-site nursery operations to provide plants for the restoration project. Costs such as materials and labor for nursery efforts should be clearly shown in your cost estimate worksheet. I would like to note that this funding is for direct or ongoing efforts, so elements such as building permanent infrastructure or purchasing large equipment is not allowable, and costs should be scaled to the quantity and type of plant propagation that is intended for the project. Here are the recommended minimum buffer. Oh, let's back up a slide, Kat. Here are the recommended buffer standards for a riparian habitat project that were adopted by the Salmon Recovery Funding Board. The key to note is that the 200-year site potential tree height buffer is highly encouraged, but not a requirement for the riparian program. There are cases where your buffer is less than site potential tree height on a temperature impaired stream, then you do need to state whether your project meets the standard exceptions listed in Appendix K. And if you cannot meet these exceptions, prepare a justification that the planting will still achieve the goal of restoring effective riparian function and provide a letter of support from either a local tribal natural resource biologist or a Department of Fish and Wildlife biologist. As linked below on the right, you'll need to use Department of Fish and Wildlife's ArcGIS mapping tool to locate and report the site potential tree height for your project. When using this GIS tool, you'll zoom into your project site and click on the map to locate the site potential tree height. Be sure to click a few times along your project stream reach or at all of your sites if there's more than one, because the site potential tree height varies even in a short length of stream. For instance, this tool designates Douglas fir at 196 feet tall as this 200-year site potential tree height for the site. Whereas just downstream, about 1,500 feet, the site potential tree height is a 225-foot Douglas fir tree. Not a huge difference, but there are situations where it could be considerable difference. So I'm going to pause for any questions that have come up in the chat before transferring over to Kendall. Good question about 303D. The manual does reference temperature impairment. It doesn't necessarily have to be a TMDL. In cases where there's enough data to suggest that there's temperatures impaired, that could be used to infer that the site is temperature impaired. They were once on the list but moved off when the TMDL was developed. I think that comes down to the whether the temperature has been addressed. I don't know if the TMDL is still active, that means it's being addressed, but until the impairment's been removed, I don't know if we would consider that no longer impaired.
Oh, okay, thanks for letting us know that, someone let us know that they can't see the questions. So the question was just about whether or not 303D category includes streams that have a TMDL. Okay. They were once on that list, but moved off when the TMDL was developed. Looks like there's another question about TMDL and 303D listing. Does the 303D listing need to be adjacent to the site, or is downstream impairment considered?
I believe this is site specific.
Yeah.
Oh, can you read the questions? Yeah.
Yeah.
How do you handle riparian buffer on a multi-channel stream with broad floodplains? Good question. I mean, every site's going to be unique. Some are going to be really defined, valley wall, riparian floodplain is going to be easy. I think you need to make the case using the guidance the DFW provides. What is that minimum buffer area? Multi-channel. I think DFW actually has a pretty good visual guide on different scenarios where you have multiple threaded streams, where the channel migration zone starts and where it ends, and what would be considered upland. So I highly recommend using that. It's hard to provide an example that kind of meets all those different scenarios. So providing as much justification and visual evidence of what your floodplain is, and then showing what that site potential tree height or proposed buffer is really important. And I find that the best resource people have provided us is oftentimes a mix of maps, include LiDAR, and which is readily available in most areas, as well as good aerial photography. What is the equivalent of ordinary high water for this funding in the estuary and near shore? Good question. I don't actually have that off the top of my head. I'd have to look in the manual. And if it's not in there, we will take note and update that and have that.
Yeah, I don't think that's in the manual, and I don't think that's in the guidance, because actually the riparian guidance that we're using from WDFW doesn't address marine habitat. So I'm not sure exactly what we can look into that and see if we can provide guidance. It could be something that we deal with on those projects specifically.
Right.
And then it looks like there's a question about non-fish bearing tribs of fish bearing streams. I guess the question would be, would planting along non-fish bearing tribs of fish bearing streams be eligible?
Yeah, we've
Yeah.
had a conversation with the review panel to help develop some of the guidance, and I think there was concern doing work that where the benefit is downstream, too far downstream. So I think you need to focus on reaches that are nearby or have a clear direct influence on fish bearing streams. And so that could be it could be the devil in the details there. Um, might depend on the scale of your project as well.
And then it looks like Tom has another question about, does planting below the ordinary high water mark in the active channel zone gravel bars count? The guidance isn't clear.
It's not. It's a good question. I think this gets back to the what if you have a multi-thread channel and you have, riparian islands.
Mhm.
Again, I think looking at the whole channel migration zone, what the river is doing in general, and looking at the widest active channel area, and then going from there on the edges, so to speak, is really what the panel will be looking at. So
And there was a question earlier about what is a link to WDFW to see if your site is greater than 50% uplands. And for that, I'm assuming that that's a question from Mel. I'm assuming that's about acquisitions. And we're not using, the GIS tool is just for site potential tree height that we're providing for planting widths. The question about uplands is, and how much of your sites on uplands is based on some guidance that we have in Appendix K, Josh,
yes, competitive.
that define, what basically we're defining as uplands. So take a look at that, because there's specific information in there for acquisitions on how to determine how much of your site is uplands versus not. Let's see, anything else? Anybody seeing any other
Great comment
questions?
from Kirsten Harmon. It's true. You really have to zoom in closely with this GIS tool to get some of these layers to pop up. You'll see the yellow layer in there, which actually I didn't find very helpful. I find just actually clicking on the map to get the specifics of each of the actual map to get that site potential tree height's the best way to do it, and not necessarily relying on the polygons that show up.
And yeah, and it looks like Casey wants to know what the name of the tool. It is linked in Prism. So in Prism, there'll be some specific questions about how wide your buffer is. And there's a link to the GIS tool there. Do we provide, I'm sure where there's a link also in the Riparian appendix to the tool. But I don't know the specific, I don't remember the exact name in order to Google it. Let's see, that's maybe WDFW, GIS. Google that, ArcGIS, WDFW, site potential tree height, that might get you there. But there are links directly to the tool via Prism and our manual.
Correct. And in this document or this PowerPoint.
Yeah, if we attach the PowerPoint. Oh, looks like Mark posted it in the chat. So it looks like the chat is working. It's not disabled anymore. So there's a link in the chat. And Dave had a comment about mean high water and ordinary high water according to some ecology. Yeah. Okay. And Hilton, what was the last bullet on slide 17? Slide 17. This one.
Performance period. So that just refers to the agreement length. RCO typically caps our agreements at 5 years, and it's expected that with justification, you'll be allowed up to 5 years for these projects, the active agreement period.
Cool. Okay. Looks like it's calmed down a little question wise. I think I got everybody's questions in the chat and in the Q&A. So I'm going to pass it on to Kendall.
Great. Thanks, Josh. Thanks, Kat. Hi, everybody. I'm Kendall Kohler, and I'll continue to walk us through the eligible project types. So riparian stewardship grants provide funding for maintenance, monitoring, and adaptive management at previously planted sites. If a previously funded riparian project is failing significantly, pay special attention to evaluating the original project plans, objectives, and identifying adaptive management going forward. Your riparian enhancement plan, which we'll discuss later in this presentation, is an important part of your grant application. Be sure it is updated to reflect the maintenance challenges the project seeks to address. In-stream habitat. So the following in-stream activities are eligible because it is understood that riparian areas are an integral part of the in-stream environment, and highly degraded sites may require more than vegetation-related work. So if work is needed to reconnect floodplain at site hydrology to streams and rivers, it may be included as a project cost. The key is that the primary goal of the project is to restore riparian function. So in-stream elements must be considered necessary to restore riparian function. Not sure how to approach? Check in with your grants manager to make sure you're meeting the eligibility requirements before getting into prison to fill out your application. And refer to details in Appendix M for more guidance. And also consider that the Surfboard Technical Review Panel is a resource to help vet these in-stream elements. Design projects are not eligible for riparian funding as a standalone project. However, design costs for eligible riparian restoration elements can be part of your AA&E cost estimate within your restoration project. These are eligible pre-agreement expenses as well. So if you track your time and itemize these in your cost estimate, we can reimburse you if your project is funded. Riparian assessments may only be proposed as a sole project type unless an exception is approved for an assessment which is necessary first step to a restoration or acquisition project. These assessments are focused on riparian habitat and are typically larger scale at reach or watershed level and must lead directly to projects that can be implemented in the next phase. Total funding for standalone assessment projects may not exceed 10% of the region's allocation. All right, so let's talk about scoping your project. So when scoping your project, think about what project type best suits the work you're proposing. Think about what you can accomplish in 4 to 5 years and plan to begin work in year 1. You may propose a single or multiple work sites, and we'll cover geographic envelopes on the next slide. While there are specific exceptions to this, match is not required for riparian funding. Riparian funds cannot be used to cover a cost increase on a previously funded surfboard project, but surfboard funds can be used for cost increases on projects initially funded with riparian funds. Indirect is eligible in this program if there's a federal nexus. And the last point on this slide, riparian grant funding may not be combined with other surfboard funding unless the work proposed is eligible in both funding programs. Please work with your lead entity and grant manager to determine if this is a good fit for your project. This may be a special case where you will be required to provide match. Lastly, riparian grants can't be used to match surfboard or PSAR. So if you're planning to work on multiple sites or reaches, but don't have all the properties identified before application, please provide a map of your geographic envelope with all parcels that provide similar fish benefits, certainty of success, and conservation values. Provide a clear prioritization process that has been developed or will be used to show how properties will be pursued for restoration or acquisition, and include previous assessments that inform the proposed approach. A strong geographic envelope application has at least one priority and example property already identified and a completed riparian enhancement plan for that site to illustrate the type of project that will be pursued. All properties included in your application require landowner acknowledgement form by application. And if funded, we will complete cultural resource consultation as properties are identified and prioritized for implementation. No ground disturbing activities can occur until the cultural resource consultation is complete and you are cleared for work. So let's talk about the Riparian Enhancement Plan. We are depending on the success of these projects. So to promote best practices, we strongly recommend that 2 weeks before your surfboard application site visit, you attach a Riparian Enhancement Plan to your application in Prism. Appendix M includes detailed guidance for each of these components, so be sure to review that before you start developing or updating your plan to align with the program requirements. We will upload an example of the Riparian Enhancement Plan to the surfboard page Kat was showing us earlier to help give folks a starting point. Your organization may have standard techniques and approaches for riparian restoration, but this is a site-specific plan that looks near and longer term. So imagine design report meets graphic planting plan meets stewardship plan. See Manual 18 Appendix M for additional details about what is required per project type. And please note that developing a riparian enhancement plan is an eligible pre-agreement cost. So include your expenses in your application cost estimate and track your hours, and we can reimburse you for this time if your project is funded. To assess your riparian restoration project, we need some key information to be included in your application. If you're unable to complete an entire REP, the highlighted elements in red are the minimum acceptable elements required for a riparian restoration project. If you request funds for a riparian stewardship project, then we'll need you to attach the REP elements from the previous restoration project along with your as-built. And we'll need to update these elements as it pertains to your stewardship proposal. So that's all we'll cover today for the REP, but again, please refer to Appendix M for details about what exactly is required for your plan per project type. And we're going to pause here. If I haven't been looking at the question.
Yeah, that's fine. Looks like there's a question from Tom about 30% cap on design. So for all of our restoration projects, and Riparian are no different, there's a 30% of the restoration costs can be used for A&E, we call it, so admin, architecture, engineering. And so that's where the design costs can be captured, is within that 30% allowable, and you need to identify that in your Prism budget in order for those costs to be eligible. So that's that. Mel has a question about riparian. Are riparian enhancement plans required for acquisitions? And no, they're just required for when there's a planting component or stewardship component. What else do we got here? Okay, Mel, again, sorry about I asked for acquisitions to define uplands. I gave you the wrong appendix. So there is Appendix L talks about the uplands versus outside other acreage. I don't know if anyone else has more about that they want to add. Elizabeth, I don't know. Elizabeth, can you speak? Or are you muted on here? Are you allowed as are you not a panelist? Elizabeth's one of our grant managers who was looking up the information for us while we were doing the presentation, but take a look at Appendix L. That's called quantifying habitat types for acquisition projects. So there's an entire guidance in the manual about that for you, for anyone who's doing acquisitions. Sorry about that, gave you the wrong one. Any other questions in there that you guys are seeing? Josh, have you been
Andrea McBride's got a great one about how do we put forward stewardship projects in light that the REP is a new deliverable, and we do address that in Appendix K. If you look at the riparian stewardship project deliverables, it delineates a lot of what it specifies elements that, if available, provide those. So you kind of have to recreate the restoration enhancement plan the best you can for this grant round, understanding that mean that some of those sections of the REP may have never been done before. The the emphasis is really on the post-implementation maintenance work you plan on doing going forward and the adaptive management work for stewardship projects.
Okay.
I also referenced which DFW guidance discusses RMZ, how to delineate that. It does an okay job. It also refers to an ecology page or document within that guidance that goes into how to find the ordinary high water mark as well. I put that in the chat though, so hopefully people can find that. All those materials are also referenced in the manual. They're linked to.
And I think we're also going to have a document. Kendall mentioned we're going to upload a kind of template riparian enhancement plan, but I think we also have like a fact sheet type of document with a resource document with lots of links to different documents that we've been gathering as we've been developing the riparian enhancement plan and riparian guidance. Looks like Aaron has a question about for stewardship proposals covering many 15+ project sites, is a stewardship plan required for each site, or can sites be grouped somehow, possibly by watershed or type of stewardship action?
I think that comes down to the level of detail you provide so that each site, I mean, if you provide site level information, so that at least there's enough information to understand what went into the site when it was originally implemented, and if the actions going forward are all pretty consistent, tabulate that in a table, an easy way to convey that information. I think that's fine. Ultimately, the idea is each new site going forward that gets implemented or enhanced will have these riparian enhancement plans. And whether they need to be updated for the stewardship phase considerably is really site specific. So, good question. I think everybody will have a different take on how to do this efficiently.
And Alex Conley says, I thought the full riparian planting plan is not required at application as long as the base info is provided and plan will be completed once funded. Or is the full plan required at time of application?
It is not required at the time of application. You're right. And the appendix specifically outlines what is required, what conceptual level stuff the review panel wants to see at a minimum. So I highly recommend taking a look at that.
Okay, I think I got them all. Just let me look real quick. Okay, I think we're up to speed. Cool. All right, moving on to Bob.
Hey guys, I'm Bob Warner. I'm an outdoor grant manager at RCO as well. And I'm going to be talking today about the Targeted Investment Program. I'm going to kind of give an overview of the program, the objectives of the program, funding and match requirements, the application timeline, and the regional process and ranking. So we don't actually have the funding for the Target Investment Program yet. However, the RCO has requested $20 million for the surfboard as part of the 2024 supplemental legislative session. And so we should know about whether or not we're going to be receiving the funding in March and certainly by the end of the supplemental legislative session. No matter how much money we receive, that all the money that has been requested for the Targeted Investment Program will go to cover projects in this program. And if we get more projects submitted, then we have money, then those additional projects will be used to submit an additional list of projects in the 2025-2027 biennium to the legislature for another funding request for these large target invested projects. So the objectives of this program is to fund specific regional priorities. And so significant population scale benefits consistent with the priorities and to accelerate the on-the-ground pace and scale of project implementation. So they're tied to their regions and to the specific priorities of each of the regions, and we'll go into that in a second. So each of the requests needs to be a minimum of $1 million and a maximum of $5 million. That doesn't mean that your project can limit is $5 million. You can partially fund a project with a higher budget than that with like a $5 million grant from the targeted investment. These projects are projects that will not be funded on the lead entity allocation. So they're investments that are kind of above and beyond what is fundable by the regional and lead entity allocations. And finally, there's no match required for these projects. So eligible projects are acquisition, restoration, and acquisition restoration combo projects. So we're not going to be funding assessments or design only projects with this funding, but like in the Riparian, up to 30% of a restoration project can be used for design. From 30% of the design or the restoration budget can be used for that from the AAME. So the initial review of these projects will be concurrent with the SRF board. So these projects will be reviewed at the lead entity level when they go out to do the SRF board site visits. So I'll also be looking at these projects. From the lead entity, it goes on to the regions, and the regions will be coming up with their submission, and it'll follow their schedule. We'll talk about that in a second. Next slide. So the region recovery organizations are responsible for identifying specific priorities in the region and specific population level recovery objectives. So they are given the sole authority to determine which of these targeted investment projects will be selected from their region. And they'll do this, they'll communicate that to the SRF board by providing a letter of support, which details the alignment of the projects with the population recovery objectives. And so the regions can submit up to 6 projects, and they'll go through the regional ranking process review, and then from there we go on to the review by the SRF board technical review panel. So you want to go next slide. So this is kind of a little bit redundant, but so the lead entity is going to review it, then they go to the regional review, and then they will go to the SRF board technical review panel, which will provide the final review of these projects in a statewide list, and they will provide their ranking to the SRF board in July or August of this summer. So these are the ranking criteria that will be used to rank the projects. Detailed information on these criteria are in Manual 18, Appendix J. And you'll notice on the last bullet there, number 10, each of the regions will be ranking their individual lists. So there will be some benefit for like the highest ranking project coming from a region will have a little bit of a benefit coming from the region when it goes to the overall statewide ranking. So like I mentioned before, this information is also available in Appendix J of Manual 18. But of course, the lead entity and regional organizations' individual timelines are going to be available from them. So contact them for information on how that will be working.
Cool, thanks, Bob. Andrea has a question about, does the can't be funded by the lead entity allocation mean that the ask has to exceed the lead entity's allocation, even if that allocation is greater than 1 million? And if no, I think that's not that's more like a objective rather than like a rule. So I know in PSAR, for PSAR large cap, it's since they don't have a base, they base it on your allocation. But for targeted, I think the idea is just that these are large, like Bob said, these are large projects that normally couldn't be funded by a lead entity's allocation. So, you know, I don't think for Skagit, your lead entity's allocation is larger than $1 million. I don't think we'd say, well, that project isn't eligible for targeted because you guys could have dumped your entire allocation into it and funded it. I think, you know, it would be possible that, yeah, it's not to just disqualify that or to give you guys a different standard. So the standard for all wherever the lead entities, whatever the project is coming from, it's a minimum of $1 million. So there isn't a different level for those of you with larger allocations. It's just kind of a general goal that like these are big projects that we want to be able to push forward. I think the board really focused on targeted investment should be an investment for so that we don't have to split up projects into multiple phases. You know, like these are really going to be showing that we can give a big influx of funding on a project that otherwise wouldn't happen. So it's not meant to be a restriction for you guys, however, or for you lead entities that have larger allocations. Any other questions on targeted? I know it sounds like I've been getting a lot of the regional RFPs. Looks like they're getting approved this month. So they'll be sending those out to their lead entity coordinators and to their areas, identifying what their process is that Bob was mentioning, as well as their priorities. So if you haven't received those yet from your lead entity coordinators or regional contacts, those will be forthcoming. So stay tuned for those. You know, we're trying to keep those as well so that we have them to share once they're approved by each of the regional organizations bodies. I don't see any other questions about TI. I think that's really all we have today. I think, you know, just a summary that site visits are starting pretty soon. So applications are due 2 weeks before site visits. Work with your lead entity to figure out what your timeline is for that. And, you know, we're excited to see all your projects out there. Anybody else, panelists, have any other comments to add?
I would just say, we will be pushing out the draft or template riparian enhancement plan and that resource document probably in about a week. And I'm sure we'll send that out via the email lists. And of course, it'll be posted on the website.
Cool.
Yeah, I imagine this workshop will probably give it like a week until it's on the website as well. So we should probably send that out.
Okay, we'll send that out to the recipients and the lead entity coordinators to distribute to their sponsors. So thanks everyone for coming. Yeah, that's all we have. All right.
Thanks, guys.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.